So this is the second video for this week, but I will not go into the detail of the text. I will not analyze the text this week with you. We will go into more detail next week. I just want to discuss a few general things, especially from the point of view of the sacrifice that a parent commits against, I could say, against his child. So we have discussed in the past, if you have taken introductory course in philosophy, we have discussed the sacrifice of Isaac, Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. And we also discussed Soren Kierkegaard's book, Fear and Trembling. And in Fear and Trembling, Kierkegaard attempts to compare, for the moment we'll talk about in this way, to compare the sacrifice that Abraham does and the one that Agamemnon does. And when he talks about tragic heroes or tragic characters, he refers specifically to the example of Agamemnon. So let's think a little bit about what happens. In the sacrifice of Isaac, what happens is that Abraham hears a commandment from God who says, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him on the mountain I will show you, without any kind of explanation and without any kind of reason for why he should engage in this thing. And what Abraham does is he wakes up second morning, he takes his son, and he walks towards the mountain for 3 days and is ready to sacrifice him. But at that moment, an angel from the Lord comes and tells him to not sacrifice the child, because now he knows that he loves God with all his might and so on. So that's very short, the story with Abraham and Isaac. And let me tell you now the story with Agamemnon very short. The goddess Artemis is getting upset with Agamemnon and with the Greeks. And they do not have wind to go to Troy. It was in ancient Greece. So, they couldn't have engines. They needed wind in order for all their ships to go to Troy. And the entire army is on the shores and is getting, of course, the men are getting angry. They need food. They need to do something. And Agamemnon is getting worried as well. And he hears from a prophet that the word from the goddess is that he needs to sacrifice his own child in order to be able to go to Troy. What's the first difference between the story I mentioned before and the story of Agamemnon? In the first one, we had no reasons whatsoever from God why Abraham should sacrifice his child. In this one, Agamemnon sacrifices his child in order to obtain something from the god, from the goddess in this case, and he also knows what the result would be. Abraham does not know, or he's not told anything. He's just told to do it without any kind of explanation, while Agamemnon knows what the result would be. So we could say, well, Agamemnon is a human being who doesn't love his child, who doesn't care at all about his daughter Iphigenia, and he sacrifices her because he wants to fulfill his quest. What's his quest? To get revenge on the people who stole away his sister-in-law, right? And to get that woman back. Anyway, but there's another perspective as well, and the perspective has to do with the fact that Agamemnon is not any kind of human being, but Agamemnon is a human being who has responsibility. He is the leader, the general of an army, and that army has the purpose, regardless of why that purpose is real, to go to Troy. And he cannot go to Troy in the absence of that sacrifice, apparently, as long as the words of the prophets are true. And we know that the words of the prophet were fulfilled because once he committed a sacrifice, he got the wind that he needed to go to Troy. But the problem is, how can we understand Agamemnon's sacrifice of his daughter? Can we justify it from a moral perspective? And if we can justify it from a moral perspective, does it mean that any of us would be in the same situation in which Agamemnon is, should do the same kind of thing, because there are moral requirements that make us choose this kind of sacrifice. And there is that suggestion, actually, not in this book, but in Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, that a tragic hero, a tragic character, actually acts within the ethical. Because what a tragic hero does, and Agamemnon would be such a person, is choosing the option that is not to his own benefit, but chooses an action that the people around him understand, that the people around him even applaud, and that the people around him would hold him responsible to do on moral grounds. And that is that he pursues the good of the many over his own good, over his interest. His interest as a father who loves his child is to not sacrifice his child. His interest as a general, his interest as the commandment of an army, is to do everything in his power so that the army succeeds in its quest. Do not understand me wrongly, I am not justifying Agamemnon's action. I am merely suggesting that it's possible to understand it from that perspective. So what I would like to do in this comment that you're writing for the video is to consider the Abraham story, even if you have not read it. Look over it, it's in Genesis 22, try to find it, and Genesis from the Bible, Genesis 22. And consider also the story of Agamemnon. And in your own words, without necessarily citing Kierkegaard or anything else, try to analyze the difference between those two actions. And then next week we'll talk more in detail about the text itself and how the text unfolds. See you next time.